You're stranded on a desolate planet. Your crew is dwindling, and hope is all but lost. The last transmission you sent, an SOS, was your only chance of survival, and it seemed like a futile attempt. Yet, what if I told you that against all odds that signal was heard? That the beings who answered it were not the friendly, curious aliens you imagined, but something far darker, far more terrifying. Something that the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy feared to even speak. About space, the vast, uncharted frontier, has always been a place of mystery and wonder. Humanity, with its boundless curiosity and ambition, has pushed further into the unknown with each passing decade. Our telescopes pierce through the darkness, our ships venture farther, and with each discovery, we come one step closer to understanding the cosmos. But for all our advancements, there are still forces in the universe so incomprehensible, so alien, that even the brightest minds quake at their existence. One such force exists on the outer edges of the galaxy, the Zelnar. If you've never heard of them, don't worry. Until recently, humanity had no idea that these beings even existed. In fact, the Zelnar weren't something humanity had ever considered. They were, in many ways, the stuff of nightmares, an enigma wrapped in mystery. Most species, including some of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, considered them a myth, a tale whispered among the stars. But when the crew of the Venedor found themselves stranded on an unknown planet at the mercy of their own technology's failure, it was the Zelnar who would answer the call for help. This is not a story of salvation. No, it is a story of how one crew's desperation would lead them to an encounter with the most feared beings in the galaxy. A desperate SOS, sent into the cold vacuum of space, somehow made its way to these enigmatic beings who were believed to be a myth. And in doing so, the crew of the Venator would come to understand the true cost of their survival. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Right now, HFY Chronicles-849 is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you enjoy unraveling the mysteries of the universe, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us grow this community together. The Venator was a top-of-the-line deep space exploration vessel, launched to study a newly discovered star system that had previously been overlooked by other explorers. It was a routine mission at first, the kind humanity was getting used to, as it pushed its reach further into the stars. The crew, though small, just 10 members, was highly trained. They were veterans of numerous space missions, ready to tackle anything the galaxy could throw at them. Their mission was to explore the star system of HD 1-89733b, a planet-sized object located in the far reaches of uncharted space. But space, as we all know, is unpredictable. A catastrophic engine failure, the result of an unknown malfunction, sent the Venator spiraling out of control. The crew tried desperately to regain control, but the damage was far too severe. Communications were lost, navigational systems were down, and the ship was slowly tumbling toward the orbit of an uncharted, hostile planet. The planet was massive, its atmosphere turbulent and inhospitable. The gravity well was too strong for the crew to escape. The odds were grim. As time passed, the Venator's crew began to realize that the situation was far worse than they'd anticipated. Their supplies were dwindling. The life support systems were on the brink of failure. They had no way of knowing if anyone would hear their distress signal, or even if they were within range of any known civilization. The thought of dying alone, light years away from home, without a shred of hope, was enough to break the spirit of even the most hardened spacefarer. But they had no choice. They had to send an SOS. It wasn't just a cry for help. It was a final, desperate plea for survival. The transmission was sent on every known frequency, a signal encoded in every possible format, hoping that something, somewhere, might hear it. In the cold silence of space, they waited. But when the crew first received the response, they thought it was a glitch, a malfunction, a distortion in the radio signal that caused an eerie, unfamiliar voice to crackle through their speakers. But the voice was not human. It wasn't anything they'd ever heard before. It was cold, distant, almost as though it was calculating. And it spoke only one thing. "We are the Zelnar. We have heard your call. Prepare for judgment." And just like that, their fate was sealed. These beings, the Zelnar, had been whispered about by explorers and scientists, but no one had ever truly confirmed their existence. Some believed them to be a super-advanced race of machines. Others thought they were an ancient, godlike species that had once ruled the galaxy. But no one, not even the most seasoned veterans of space exploration, had ever dared to cross their path. The Zelnar were legends. Until now. Now, these beings had heard the Venator's SOS, and their answer was not a promise of rescue. No. The Zelnar had come to evaluate the crew, to assess their worthiness. They would test the humans, each step more dangerous than the last. What were they looking for? What did they want from the crew? And why had they chosen this moment to reveal themselves to humanity? The answers were far more complex and terrifying than anyone could imagine. The crew of the Venator sat in stunned silence as the transmission from the Zelnar echoed through the damaged ship. "Prepare for judgment," it had said. There was no reassurance in those words, no offer of help, no promise of mercy, just the chilling certainty of something far worse. The Zelnar had responded, but no one knew what that meant. Were they coming to destroy them? Or were they offering a test of survival? The crew could only speculate, and as each minute passed, the tension grew thick in the air. The crew had no answers, no way of knowing what to expect, and no time to waste. The Venator's systems were on the brink of collapse, and they had to act quickly. Captain Alara Voss, the mission leader, paced the bridge, trying to think through the possibilities. Her sharp mind raced through every scenario, every possibility. She knew the Zelnar were legendary in their power, but what did they want? If they wanted to end the crew's lives, it would have been simple for them to do so. Their technology was incomprehensible, beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. The Venator could be obliterated with a single thought. Yet they hadn't. They had sent a warning, a call to prepare, and that was what kept her alive, what kept her team fighting for every second. "We need to get a handle on the ship's systems," Captain Voss ordered, her voice firm. "We can't afford to die here, not like this. We've got to stabilize what we can." Her command wasn't just to fix the failing systems. It was to find a way to prepare for whatever the Zelnar had planned. If they were here, if they were listening, they had to know that humanity wasn't going to go down without a fight. Dr. Cade Sampson, the ship's lead scientist, worked frantically at his console. His fingers flew across the holographic interface as he tried to restore communications with the outer world. "I've been running the numbers," he said, his voice tinged with anxiety. "The Zelnar, they don't just communicate on any frequency. They use something we can't even begin to understand. The language, it's almost non-linear. It's more like a thought pattern than actual speech. This isn't something that can be answered in the traditional sense." Sampson's words only added to the sense of dread. The Zelnar weren't just sending a simple message. They were communicating in ways that bypassed everything humanity had ever understood about language, about communication. They were far beyond anything the crew had learned or imagined. At the back of the bridge, Ensign Luca Ortiz, the ship's communications officer, was listening intently to the static that had followed the Zelnar's transmission. The more she focused, the more certain she became that something more was hidden in the signal, something beneath the surface. "I think there's something encoded in the transmission," she said, voice shaking. "But it's not in any format we've ever encountered. It's almost like they're sending information directly to our minds." The crew was horrified by that realization. The idea that the Zelnar weren't just communicating through technology but also potentially influencing their thoughts, penetrating their very consciousness, was beyond chilling. It was as if the Zelnar were not just watching them, but reading them, testing their minds. The ship's external sensors began picking up unusual readings from the planet below. They couldn't see the Zelnar, but the planet itself had begun to pulse with a strange energy, a radiation signature unlike anything they'd encountered. The atmosphere, thick with electromagnetic interference, seemed to pulse in sync with their SOS signal, as if the planet itself were responding to the Zelnar's call. But why? The truth was that the crew wasn't just stranded. They were in the midst of a cosmic test. The Zelnar were assessing humanity's potential, determining whether this small, young species was worthy of survival in the vast, dangerous galaxy they inhabited. This test wasn't about physical strength, or military might, or technological prowess. It was about something much more fundamental: the resilience of the human spirit. The Zelnar's reputation was built on fear, but there was no denying their intelligence. They weren't mindless destroyers. They were ancient beings, and their actions were deliberate, calculated. The crew wasn't facing an invasion. They were facing an interrogation, a trial, where every decision could mean the difference between life and death. Captain Voss gathered her team in the war room to discuss the next steps. They knew that they needed to act quickly, but how could they even begin to comprehend the scale of what was happening? It wasn't just their survival at stake. It was the very future of humanity. "We don't know what the Zelnar want," she said, her voice steady but filled with the weight of the moment. "But we do know one thing. We have to show them that humanity is more than just a species clinging to survival. We have to prove that we can endure, adapt, and rise above anything. The galaxy throws at us." Her words rang out in the cold, metallic chamber. The crew's resolve solidified. The Zelnar had chosen them, and they would not go down without showing what humanity was truly made of. The Venator was battered, its systems failing, but the crew was far from beaten. If they were going to face the Zelnar, they would do it on their own terms. But what was it that the Zelnar wanted to see? Were they testing humanity's strength? Its intellect? Its unity? The answers would reveal themselves soon enough, and as the crew braced themselves for whatever came next, they realized that the true test had already begun. The question now wasn't whether they would survive. The question was, how far would they be willing to go to prove humanity's place? In the galaxy, the Venator was alive with a tense energy that hadn't been felt before. As the crew members gathered around, studying the data, trying to understand the meaning of the mysterious Zelnar transmission, they realized something terrifying. What they were about to face wasn't just about technology or survival. It was about humanity's very identity. This was the moment when humanity would stand before the greatest test it had ever encountered. But no one had any idea what the Zelnar were truly capable of. They didn't know whether they were being judged or preyed upon. Yet the fear of the unknown was the least of their concerns now. Captain Voss ordered the crew to begin preparations. The Venator's systems were falling apart. But it wasn't just physical damage they needed to worry about. It was the psychological toll of what they had learned. If the Zelnar truly had the ability to affect their thoughts, then their minds, their very consciousness, were now under assault. Dr. Cade Sampson, the ship's scientist, turned his focus back to the Zelnar's signal, studying the faint traces of information hidden within the cryptic transmission. He hadn't been able to decode it fully yet, but something had been gnawing at him. The more he examined the signal, the more he realized that there were intentional distortions in it, patterns that didn't belong to any known form of communication. It was almost as though the signal itself was structured to evoke specific emotions: fear, confusion, a sense of inadequacy. "The Zelnar didn't just send a message," Sampson muttered, a grim realization dawning upon him. "They're manipulating our perception. The whole point of this transmission is to shake us, to make us question everything. We're not just being tested on our ability to survive. We're being tested on our mental fortitude. Can we stand up to their influence?" The realization hit the crew hard. For the first time since their distress signal had been sent, they understood the true scale of the test they were facing. It wasn't just a physical trial. It was an assault on their very minds. The Zelnar were playing a psychological game, and the stakes were higher than any of them had imagined. The ship's AI, a sophisticated system named Nova, had been monitoring the Zelnar's signals as well. But even Nova was struggling to make sense of the incoming data. The AI had never encountered anything like it before, and that uncertainty was terrifying in itself. The Venator's crew relied on Nova's guidance and calculations to navigate the galaxy. If Nova couldn't even process what was happening, then their situation was far more dangerous than anyone could predict. "Captain," said Ensign Ortiz, her voice trembling, "I'm detecting something. The planet below. It's changing. The atmosphere, the energy pulses. They're intensifying. It's like the whole planet is reacting to the signal. It's almost like A deep, unsettling rumble shook the ship, cutting her off mid-sentence. The crew braced themselves as the entire Venator seemed to lurch in space. Then, on the monitor, screens, something even more horrifying appeared. Large, shifting distortions in space itself, warping the planet's surface in a way that defied all known physical laws. The crew had seen anomalies before: black holes, gravitational waves, cosmic storms, but this was unlike anything they'd ever encountered. It was as if the very fabric of space-time was bending to the will of the Zelnar. "Get us out of here," shouted Captain Voss, panic rising in her voice. "Engage the engines, now!" But it was too late. As Nova frantically tried to initiate the emergency protocols, the systems were flooded with data too complex to process in real time. The crew was paralyzed by the sheer scale of what was happening. Their ship, so advanced, so powerful, was no match for the force that was now manipulating the space around them. Ensign Ortiz, her fingers flying over her console, gasped, "Captain, the planet's surface. It's splitting open. There's something coming out. Something enormous. I'm reading massive energy signatures. It's alive. It's moving toward us." For a moment, everything went silent. The crew was on edge, waiting, as if the entire universe had momentarily stopped spinning. Then, on the main screen, a massive shape began to emerge from the planet's surface, something so large and so alien that the crew's collective breath was taken away. The Zelnar had arrived, and they weren't alone. The planet was alive, with their presence. Vast organic structures that appeared to be forming from the very ground itself, rising up like titanic figures of blackened metal and shifting shadows. It was clear now. These were no ordinary beings. The Zelnar didn't just conquer worlds, they reshaped them. They were capable of manipulating entire planets, altering the very land beneath their feet as if it were clay. Suddenly, Captain Voss realized the terrifying truth. The Zelnar weren't just a species of superior beings. They were the architects of something much grander. Their purpose wasn't just to test humanity. They were the galaxy's ultimate judges. Their power to manipulate space and matter, their ability to break down even the most advanced technology, was proof of their absolute dominance. And now, they had come to pass judgment on humanity. "We've made contact with something far beyond us," Captain Voss muttered under her breath, a chill running down her spine. The Zelnar hadn't come to simply destroy the Venator. No, they had come to test humanity's place in the universe. The trial had already begun, and the true cost of failure was becoming terrifyingly clear. Humanity was facing its first true reckoning with a species that could shape worlds, and they had no idea what the Zelnar were truly capable of. What kind of judgment would they pass? And more importantly, would humanity even survive long enough to prove itself worthy? The crew was now caught in a struggle for more than just their lives. They were fighting for humanity's survival in a galaxy where power was not determined by technology or strength, but by the will and endurance of the mind itself. The fate of mankind rested not on weapons or ships, but on their ability to withstand the unyielding force of the Zelnar's influence. The Venator's systems groaned under the immense strain. The ship's hull trembled, and the once vibrant hum of its engines had turned into a low, discordant growl. The crew, now on high alert, were not just facing the prospect of being obliterated. They were being slowly dismantled, piece by piece, by an unseen force. Dr. Cade Sampson had spent most of his career studying extraterrestrial phenomena, but nothing had prepared him for this. As he stood in front of the communications panel, staring at the now static-filled transmission, his mind raced. The more he observed the signals, the clearer it became. This wasn't just an alien force. The Zelnar had mastered the art of warfare in ways humanity had never dreamed of, blending psychological manipulation with technology so advanced it seemed almost like magic. They weren't just creating weapons of war. They were breaking the very fabric of the human psyche. "What are they trying to do to us?" Cade muttered, his voice tinged with disbelief. The transmission wasn't just a means of communication. It was a weapon in itself. The Zelnar didn't need armies to conquer. They didn't need overwhelming firepower or massive fleets. They could break entire civilizations with a thought, and with every pulse of the signal, they were doing just that. Meanwhile, on the bridge, Captain Voss was struggling to keep a calm demeanor. She had dealt with pirates, galactic storms, and political tensions between species. But nothing compared to this. The fear was palpable throughout the ship. The crew members who had once shown unwavering confidence were now visibly shaken. And it wasn't just the appearance of the Zelnar ships. They were feeling the effects of their influence. The communication panels flickered with erratic bursts, and the once steady hum of the engines began to warp. A sense of unease spread like a contagion. "What are we supposed to do?" Ensign Ortiz asked, her voice shaking, as she tried to pull up any useful data on the approaching Zelnar ships. But all she saw was static. The systems were failing in real time, her screen flickering like a dying flame. Her hands hovered over the console, unsure of what to do. "Next, we need to fight back," Captain Voss replied, her voice steel-cold. But even she knew that in this moment, the ship's weaponry might as well have been toys in the face of what they were up against. As the tension mounted, the Venator began its slow descent toward the planet's surface. They had no choice but to land. It was their only option to avoid being drawn into the Zelnar's gravitational pull. But the planet beneath them was no ordinary world. It pulsed with a strange energy. And now, as the ship began its descent, it was clear that this energy wasn't natural. It was artificial, sculpted by the hands of beings who had long mastered the manipulation of planetary forces. The ground itself seemed to resist their landing, as if it were alive. "This world was never meant to be a home," Dr. Sampson whispered, almost to himself. "It's a battleground, a place where the Zelnar shape and reshape the terrain to reflect their will, and now they've chosen this place to judge us." Captain Voss ordered the crew to prepare for a ground engagement. Despite the overwhelming power of the Zelnar, they could not afford to give in without a fight. They had to at least make an attempt. The planet was the battlefield now, and they had to take the fight to the Zelnar. The Venator's landing gear touched down with a shudder, and the crew scrambled to get their ground combat gear ready. The airlock hissed open. They stepped into the unknown, a planet that had been twisted by forces far beyond anything they'd ever encountered. The sky overhead was a sickly orange, filled with storm clouds that churned like an angry sea. The ground beneath their boots was hard and uneven, a stark contrast to the lush, welcoming planets they'd explored before. It was cold, unnaturally so, and the air had an electric charge that made the hairs on their arms stand on end. Every step they took felt like it was one step closer to the inevitable clash. Dr. Sampson, with his mind whirling, had come to a troubling realization. The Zelnar's true power wasn't just their ability to manipulate minds or manipulate reality itself. It was their ability to bend space itself to their will. The planet before them wasn't merely a victim of the Zelnar's influence. It was a weapon, a massive, dormant superweapon that was now waking up. "What if the planet is their ultimate weapon?" Sampson asked, his voice grim as he stood next to Voss. "What if this place isn't just a test? What if the planet itself is a tool in their arsenal, a weapon meant to reshape entire civilizations?" Voss narrowed her eyes as she scanned the horizon. "You're saying we're standing on a bomb?" Dr. Sampson nodded. "In a sense, yes. The Zelnar are shaping this world's very foundation. It's like they've set the pieces in motion, and now we're the final act in this game they've been playing." But the crew had no time to dwell on such thoughts. The ground before them began to rumble, the massive blackened monoliths rising from the earth like sentinels, their surfaces gleaming with a deadly, unnatural sheen. They were slowly moving toward them, unblinking and unforgiving. These were no ordinary statues or structures. They were living, breathing entities forged by the Zelnar themselves. And then, the silence shattered. The air grew thick, crackling, with an energy that seemed to reverberate through the bones of every person on the surface. A deep, reverberating voice echoed across the land, not spoken but somehow felt deep inside their minds. "Humanity, you stand before the might of the Zelnar. You are a test that will decide your future or your end." The crew froze in place, the words reverberating in their very thoughts, sending shivers down their spines. The voice wasn't just a communication, it was an invasion. It was more than words. It was an imposition. The Zelnar weren't just speaking to them. They were bending their will upon them. In that moment, the weight of their struggle became clear. This wasn't just about survival. This was about proving that humanity had a place in the galaxy, that they could stand up to the unimaginable power of the Zelnar and overcome it. But how could they win? How could they possibly endure against a force that could manipulate their thoughts, their very perception of reality? As they ventured deeper into the landscape, the crew was on edge, every step a reminder that their survival wasn't guaranteed. They weren't just fighting for their lives anymore. They were fighting for the right to exist. The oppressive atmosphere weighed down on the crew as they marched deeper into the strange world. Every step was filled with uncertainty, but there was no turning back now. The sky above them was a swirling mass of dark clouds, as if the planet itself had been marred by a constant storm, a reflection of the impending chaos. The air, thick with the electric charge of the planet's twisted energies, vibrated against their skin, giving each breath a palpable heaviness. Captain Voss remained at the forefront, leading the team with a determined expression, though even she could feel the anxiety creeping under her skin. The haunting voice of the Zelnar still echoed in the back of her mind, every word resonating with a deep, insidious gravity. Humanity is a test. It was an ominous declaration, one that seemed to suggest they were not just fighting for survival, but for something far more complex, more dangerous. Dr. Sampson, his mind racing with the implications of the Zelnar's power, followed closely behind. He had been right about the planet being a weapon, but the realization brought no comfort. This wasn't just a place of conflict, it was a place where the Zelnar could manipulate the laws of physics, bending reality itself to their whims. His training in exoarchaeology had taught him that ancient civilizations often left behind monuments and devices of incredible power, but nothing like this. These monoliths were not merely artifacts, they were sentient, alive with energy and purpose, and they were now turning their attention to the crew. As they moved deeper into the labyrinth of monolithic structures, the crew couldn't help but feel like they were walking through a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. The air seemed to warp around them, twisting their senses, making the world feel wrong. Reality was shifting, slipping out of their grasp. They couldn't be sure what was real anymore, and that terrified them. Was the ground beneath their feet solid, or was it simply an illusion? Were the towering structures truly moving, or was it the world around them that was changing? Then, without warning, the ground trembled violently. The crew stumbled, trying to regain their footing, but it was no use. A massive shockwave reverberated through the landscape, sending cracks through the ground. The sky cracked open with a blinding flash of light, and then silence. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, everything went still. It was the kind of silence that seemed to suck all the sound out of the universe, like the calm before an even greater storm. Then, from the heart of the broken landscape, massive shapes began to emerge. They were creatures, but not like any creatures the crew had ever seen. Towering over 10 feet tall, their bodies were made of solid, obsidian-like material that shimmered with an eerie, unnatural glow. Their limbs were long, segmented, and pulsing, with dark energy, and their faces were obscured by hooded cloaks, making their true nature impossible to discern. But the Zelnar didn't need to be seen to strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. Their presence alone was enough. "What the hell are those?" Ensign Ortiz gasped, her voice trembling. She held her weapon in front of her, but there was no mistaking the terror in her eyes. These weren't enemies they could simply shoot or outsmart. These were the Zelnar's personal enforcers, their warriors, their protectors, and they weren't here for a simple fight. They were here to test the crew to their absolute limits. Dr. Sampson took a step back, his mind racing as he pieced together the terrifying truth. They're not just soldiers, they're biomechanical constructs, living weapons designed to manipulate the planet's energy. They were built to bend space, to shape reality to the Zelnar's will. And they're here to stop us. The crew stood in stunned silence, realizing the magnitude of their situation. These creatures were not just invincible. They were designed to adapt, to evolve with the fight. There would be no easy way out. This wasn't just a battle of strength. It was a battle of minds, of willpower, of survival against an opponent whose very presence twisted the fabric of reality. "Get ready!" Captain Voss ordered, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "We fight, or we die here!" But even as she issued the order, the crew knew that fighting these creatures with weapons alone would not be enough. They needed to find a way to destabilize the Zelnar's control over the planet. They needed to break the grip the Zelnar had on the very fabric of reality itself. But how? How could they possibly hope to overcome something so deeply intertwined with the planet's core? And then, like a light flickering on in the back of their minds, Dr. Sampson remembered something. A hypothesis he'd once read in an ancient text. A theory regarding the Zelnar's manipulation of energy fields. He wasn't sure if it was true, but if it was, it could be the key to understanding how to fight back. The Zelnar might be able to bend space and time, but they were still bound by the laws of physics. And if they could exploit those laws, they might have a chance. "I think I have an idea," Dr. Sampson said, his voice steady but urgent. "If we can access the central node of the planet's energy grid, we might be able to disrupt the Zelnar's control. It won't be easy, but it's our best shot." Captain Voss nodded, determination returning to her eyes. "Then let's move. We can't afford to waste any more time." The crew turned their attention back to the task at hand, knowing that this would be no simple mission. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to prove that humanity could endure, no matter how impossible the odds. The crew moved forward with steely determination, the ever-present threat of the Zelnar's enforcers looming behind them. The ground beneath their boots shifted constantly, as if it were alive, shifting to create obstacles and make their progress more difficult. Each step was a battle against the planet's hostile will, and the oppressive atmosphere weighed on them like a physical force. But they couldn't stop. They had a mission, and failure wasn't an option. "Keep moving," Captain Voss commanded, her voice cutting through the tension. "We don't have much time." Dr. Sampson, leading the way with a faint, unspoken hope that his theory would prove correct, glanced around nervously. The planet's surface seemed to shift in response to their movement, almost as if it were alive and aware of their intrusion. The monoliths that once seemed merely ornamental were now more than just markers. They were the heart of the planet's power, and they were watching. The glowing lights embedded in their massive surfaces pulsed with an ominous rhythm, as if anticipating the crew's next move. But the team had to keep moving. They had to reach the core before the Zelnar's enforcers could stop them. "We need to find the central node. Should be located underneath the largest monolith," Sampson muttered to himself. "That's where all the energy is converging, and if we can disrupt it—" The sentence hung in the air, unfinished, as Captain Voss suddenly held up her hand, signaling for the crew to halt. Ahead of them, the ground shimmered in an unnatural way, almost as if reality itself was distorting. A low hum filled the air, vibrating deep in their bones. They had reached the threshold, the center of the Zelnar's control over the planet. A soft, eerie voice echoed through the crew's comms, distant but unmistakable. It was the Zelnar. "You dare to challenge us?" The voice seemed to vibrate the very air around them. The language was alien, incomprehensible, yet somehow the meaning was clear. Defiance would not be tolerated. Captain Voss's heart pounded in her chest as she turned to Dr. Sampson. "This is it. We disrupt this, and we break their control. You ready?" Sampson nodded, his fingers already working over his wrist device, inputting the final codes to access the planet's energy grid. The task was far from simple. If his calculations were wrong, the planet might collapse, or worse, the crew might be destroyed by the very energy they sought to control. Yet there was no time to hesitate. The hum grew louder, and the shimmering in the air intensified. Suddenly, the very earth beneath their feet rumbled as a massive shape rose from the ground. A towering, dark silhouette, resembling a serpent but with countless mechanical limbs, unfurled before them. It was the Zelnar's final line of defense, an apex predator designed to protect the heart of the planet's power. Its surface rippled with dark energy, each movement a ripple in the fabric of space-time. "Everyone, get back!" Voss shouted. "Prepare for battle!" The team scrambled into position, but even as they did, they realized that the creature was more than just an obstacle. It was a manifestation of the planet's energy, a guardian forged from the very essence of the Zelnar's manipulation of the laws of physics. This creature didn't just fight. It restructured the environment around it, twisting the reality of space and time. One wrong move, and the crew could be caught in an infinite loop or thrown into a pocket dimension where they would be lost. Forever. Ortiz, the sharpshooter of the group, raised her rifle, targeting the glowing pulse points that seemed to be the creature's weak spots. She fired, the energy blast ripping through the air with a deafening sound. But the creature didn't flinch. It merely absorbed the energy, its body reconfiguring as it adapted to the attack. "This isn't working!" Ortiz shouted, frustration creeping into her voice. "It's too strong." Samson quickly adjusted his device, trying to override the planet's control. The energy field around them flared, crackling like lightning, but he could feel the planet fighting back against his attempts. The air was thick with static, every movement sending a shockwave of disorienting energy. The creature lurched forward, its mechanical limbs stretching out like massive tendrils, each one reaching for the crew with terrifying speed. And then, in a moment of clarity, Samson's mind clicked into place. He could feel it. The energy. Grid wasn't just a source of power. It was a massive neural network, a web connecting the planet's every action, every defense mechanism, to a single node deep below their feet. If he could access that node and force a disruption, he could sever the Zellner's control, but he needed more time. "Captain, I need a distraction," Samson called out. "Give me a few more seconds." Voss nodded without hesitation. "We'll cover you. Move fast." As Samson continued his work, the crew leaped into action. Ortiz fired again, her aim deadly, while Sergeant Alvarez used his explosives to detonate chunks of the planet's surface, creating openings and distractions. The creature responded violently, its massive limbs slashing through the air, but it wasn't enough to stop the relentless assault from the crew. Voss led the charge, staying close to Samson. "Hurry up, Samson!" she shouted as they dodged, and weaved around the creature's attacks. "We can't hold this thing off forever." Samson's fingers danced across his wrist device, his focus unshakable despite the chaos unfolding around him. His mind was clear. One shot, one perfect alignment, and they could bring it all crashing down. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Samson's device emitted a high-pitched beep. "Got it!" he yelled, the relief evident in his voice. The planet seemed to respond to the change in frequency, as the energy field flickered, momentarily weakening. "No." The Zellnar's voice echoed in their minds once more, filled with a deep, primal rage. "You have made a grave mistake." With a final surge of energy, Samson pressed the final sequence, and the entire energy grid shuddered. The ground trembled, violently, but this time, it wasn't just the Zellnar's wrath. It was the planet itself fighting back. The monoliths around them trembled, their energy flickering, destabilizing as the heart of the planet's power was severed. The creature, in front of them, shrieked, its body convulsing as its energy matrix unraveled. It collapsed to the ground with a deafening crash, the energy from its body dissipating into the atmosphere, leaving nothing but a faint, glowing residue. The oppressive hum that had filled the air began to fade, but the battle was far from over. With the energy grid disabled, the planet began to destabilize, its once unified control slipping away into chaos. The crew was not out of danger yet, and the Zellnar would surely not let their prized weapon fall without retaliation. The crew had no time to relish their success. The ground shook violently beneath their feet as the planet itself began to fight back, its once controlled energy now in complete disarray. The monoliths, which had stood as silent sentinels for centuries, were now crumbling. Their light faded, and with it, the once perfect harmony of the planet's systems began to unravel. The Zellnar's grip on the world was slipping. But so was the world's stability. "Get ready," Captain Voss yelled, pulling her team into action. "We've only got minutes before this planet implodes. Move!" Dr. Samson, his face pale but resolute, pushed forward, his mind already calculating their escape route. "The atmosphere's destabilizing. We need to reach the transport shuttle, and fast." "Where's the nearest exit?" Ortiz asked, scanning the chaotic horizon for signs of escape. The air was thick with electrical storms as energy crackled violently above them, and massive chunks of the once solid landscape now floated in mid-air, pulled by unseen forces. "West side of the core," Samson shouted back. "We've got a straight shot if we move now." They sprinted through the chaos, dodging falling debris, as the planet seemed to rebel against its impending destruction. Each step felt like they were walking on a living, breathing entity. The ground beneath them bucked like a wild animal, and the sky above split open with brilliant flashes of lightning. Yet the crew didn't falter. Their mission had come too far, and failure was not an option. "Focus, everyone!" Voss barked, her voice cutting through the madness like a lifeline. "We stick together. Move fast. Stay sharp." The crew pushed through the chaos, their every step amplified by the ground's tremors. But ahead of them, there was still a glimmer of hope. Their shuttle, the last safe haven on the planet, was within reach, nestled against the jagged cliffs of the core. But the path ahead was perilous. As they neared the shuttle, the ground cracked open, and the Zelnar's final defense materialized before them. A massive, imposing figure. An enormous warship, sleek and terrifying, materialized from beneath the planet's surface. Its black obsidian surface glimmered with an eerie, almost liquid-like sheen, and its shape was unlike anything the crew had ever seen. It hovered above them, its weapons primed and ready. The Zelnar had come to make sure they didn't leave. "This is it," Voss said, her voice steady but her eyes flashing with determination. "It's either us or them." The crew scattered into position. Ortiz was the first to fire, her rifle sending a barrage of energy blasts into the hovering ship's shields. But the attacks were futile. The ship absorbed the energy without so much as a scratch. It wasn't just a ship. It was a manifestation of the Zelnar's rage, their desperation, their final answer to a challenge they would never forget. The ship retaliated. Massive plasma beams shot down from its weapon ports, cutting through the air like surgical blades. The crew dove for cover as explosions ripped through the terrain around them. The air was thick with the smell of burning rock and ozone, and the sound of the ship's weapons fired continuously, punctuating the chaos. Samson, still holding his device, watched the unfolding destruction, his mind racing. "We need to overload the core," he shouted over the blasts. "It's our only chance to destroy the ship and take down the Zelnar." "Are you insane?" Sergeant Alvarez yelled. "That's a one-way ticket to—" "I know," Samson interrupted. "But we've come this far. If we don't, we'll never get another shot. Trust me." Voss looked at him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing with determination. "Do it. We'll cover you." The crew leaped into action, giving Samson the opening he needed. Ortiz took aim at the warship's energy core, her shots hitting their mark, while Alvarez set charges along the cliffside, hoping to create a distraction long enough for Samson to activate his device. The countdown was set. They had mere moments before the planet's unstable core would either implode or, hopefully, detonate the Zelnar warship once and for all. "I'm almost there," Samson yelled, his fingers flying across the device, inputting the final coordinates that would send the pulse into the heart of the core. The ship above them responded with a fury, unleashing its full force on the crew. But they were relentless. Ortiz's shots echoed through the air, disrupting the ship's shield systems just enough for the pulse to find its mark. Samson's device activated, and with a high-pitched whine, the planet seemed to freeze for a split second. Then, the ground cracked open beneath them. The energy from the core surged, creating a massive shockwave that rippled through the planet like a bullet being shot through water. The ground shook, the air trembled, and the Zelnar warship's energy systems overloaded in an explosion of light and sound. The crew was thrown back by the blast. Their bodies slammed against the rocky terrain as the entire planet seemed to collapse in on itself. The warship, along with the Zelnar's hold on the planet, disintegrated in a blinding flash. For a brief moment, everything was silent. Then, as if waking from a nightmare, the sound of crumbling earth returned. The planet was falling apart. Fractures spread across its surface as its core collapsed under the strain of the unleashed energy. But in the distance, the shuttle was still intact, waiting for them. Voss groaned, pushing herself to her feet as the others did the same. "We need to go! Now!" The shuttle's engines roared to life as they sprinted toward it. The ground beneath them seemed to fold and collapse with every step, and they could feel the gravity of the destruction growing stronger. They reached the shuttle just as the planet began to implode, the sky above them flashing with violent energy. The shuttle doors closed behind them, sealing the crew in as they accelerated away from the dying world. The destruction was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. A fiery, tumultuous end for a planet that had been the key to the Zelnar's dominance. As they escaped the planet's orbit, the crew looked out the shuttle's windows, watching, as the once thriving world now disintegrated into a chaotic mass of fire and debris. The warship was gone. The planet was no more. "Did we win?" Ortiz asked, her voice shaky but relieved. Captain Voss sat back, her gaze focused on the destruction. "Below. We did," she said quietly. "But we'll never forget what it took to get here." Samson looked around at the crew, each of them bruised, battered, but alive. "The galaxy just learned not to mess with humanity," he said with a small smile. "And we learned something too. No one is ever truly alone, no matter how far out you go." The shuttle soared through the stars, leaving the ashes of a world behind. And somewhere, in the far reaches of the galaxy, the Zelnar were plotting their next move.